With that, let's call the October 2nd, 2019 Area Plan Commission Tippecanoe County Ordinance Committee meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes from the September 4th, 2019 meeting as submitted.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That motion carries. On to a solar energy update on how solar energy companies are regulated by the IURC. And Zach?
Thank you. And just as a little bit of background, the reason we care about this is because if the IURC, which is the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, is going to regulate a public utility, then almost guaranteed they are going to be exempt from either any of our local zoning ordinances. And the gentleman who was here from Duke kind of relayed that, and that's going to be consistent with my opinion almost always. So staff and I did a little bit of background research on what types of public utilities are going to be governed and what the IURC process looks like for those. So at the very most basic level, under statute, any company, any organization, anybody who is producing heat, light, water, or power is going to qualify as a public utility. And it's as simple as that. If you are producing energy, by statute, you are a public utility in the state of Indiana. So that's our starting point. Now, where it gets a little bit more complicated is the IURC has a process where they can take these public utilities, anybody who's producing energy, and they can make a decision that they're going to decline to exercise jurisdiction. That is important because if they decline to exercise jurisdiction, then my interpretation of the law is that that entity will then be subject to local zoning. So if the IURC says, hey, we're not going to regulate you guys, then local zoning would apply. So that's kind of our starting point. Now, the process that the IURC goes through is a public hearing, and we've done some research on this. What it looks like is often private companies, not necessarily the big Dukes of the world, but smaller private companies will make a decision early on that they want to not be regulated by the IURC. And for whatever reason, that probably makes financial sense for them in a lot of different regulatory reasons. So at that point, they will then file a petition with the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission indicating that we want to do a project. We believe under the normal rules we would be regulated as a public utility, but we think this is a case where you should decline to exercise jurisdiction over us. So that then is a public process with filings and attorneys, and the IURC sort of vets that on their own end, and they make a decision on whether or not they're going to decline jurisdiction. Now, again, for our purposes, why do we care? Well, as part of that process, there are a couple different ways you can get the IURC to decline jurisdiction. One is if it's for the public good. And we pulled a couple of these decisions, and you can see very quickly that part of defining what the public good is the local effect on zoning and the local community. So that is something that the IURC looks at when they're making that decision. So they do an analysis. Are you complying with zoning? Are you complying with permits? Are you causing, distress to the community? They're doing that analysis when they're making the decision as to whether or not they're going to decline jurisdiction. So that's a good thing, because what that means is if a company wants to not be regulated by the state and the IURC, they're going to have to show that they're complying with all the local regulations and everything else. So that's good for us. There are other ways that you can seek to not be regulated by the IURC. There are statutory provisions for things like alternative energy, and back in 2013, there was a group of solar companies that wanted to not be regulated by the IURC. As part of that process, they had a statutory exception they wanted to fall under. Again, why is it important for us? Well, when they made their petition, they indicated specifically that they were complying with all the permits, complying with all drainage, complying with all local zoning laws. laws. So the reason we care, again, is because if we spend all this time focusing on writing our own solar zoning ordinance, anyone who's governed by the IURC is probably going to be exempt. But private, smaller companies that do not want to be governed by the IURC would likely be subject to our local zoning ordinance, so it wouldn't be a wasted effort. For an example of this, I think you could look recently to sort of the developments on the changes in the wind farm energy. And there are several cases of local wind farm companies that have went to the IURC and asked that they not be regulated, declined jurisdiction, and that's why they're so invested in how the local ordinances are written. So from that perspective, if we do write an ordinance and we do come up with something, the default is if you are a public utility, you are probably going to be exempt from that. But there are going to be a lot of companies that, for financial reasons, don't want to be governed by the IURC. And in those cases, it's my opinion that they would be subject to our local zoning ordinance if the IURC says, hey, we don't want to exert our jurisdiction over you. So that's kind of the base level starting point as to why we would do something like this. There's one other note, but I'll probably pass it to Rabita now so she can talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the starting process here.
Sure. Let me pull up the presentation for you guys. Give me 2 seconds.
So basically, we have a need for doing this.
Yes, and the question is, we have a need for doing this. What you'd never want to do is you never want to institute something that is not going to be useful for the community. And here, there certainly is a need if we do believe there's going to be development in the solar field. Even if some entities might be exempt, it looks like there could be potentially many that are not if they choose to not be regulated by the IURC.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I am going to introduce a tool developed by APA, American Planning Association, and U.S. Department of Energy it is a participatory planning exercise developed for communities like ours. So the game, well, not the game, but this exercise is developed in a form of a board game. And we're presenting this in front of you today because we think this is a good tool to use with our community as we are thinking about solar development. So the purpose of this exercise is to get community members thinking about solar development options from a land use perspective. So it'll be, let me go through this quickly here. Like I said, the exercise is developed in a form of board game. It engages the community and the residents. So this is what the board game looks like. As you can see, it has different types of land uses already established. So second piece of the board game is basically all the push pins, which represents different types of solar installations. And let me briefly talk about how this exercise plays out. All the pieces of the game are available to us for free. We pretty much can print this in our office. Of course, we have to purchase push pins, but that's the only expense that we have to think about for this exercise. So each game, you can conduct this game with a larger audience as well because each team can consist of 10 to 15 individuals. It takes, well, according to the manual, it says it takes about 2 hours, but I think staff agrees that it probably could take less than 2 hours because the game itself has a lot of pieces where you explain all the land uses and all the characters that come with the game needs to be explained. But in our case, I don't think that will be necessary, so we will save some time doing that. So game does come with the different characters. So each member that is playing this game will be given a character. So they will be playing a role of different characters as you see on the screen. And you can make your own if you want. So as you can see on the middle of the screen here, this is the board game. And the white pin is supposed to be a rooftop solar system, which goes right on top of the house. So as you proceed with this game, your board will fill with different types of push pins. The game is divided into 2 rounds. First round starts with setting a goal. Every goal that you see on the screen, that's predetermined. Those are the only 3 options available for each team. You pick one of those, and then you select the characters, and then you place your game pieces, which are the push pins, to meet those goals. So everything you see there is in kilowatt hours. So you basically have to come up with different configuration of installation to meet those goals. And once you do that, second round is the component that we think would be very valuable for the community. That's the one where we talk about balancing community priorities, whether we want to save agricultural land or whether we want to save prime development areas, and how that would impact solar development. And the second tier to this is how different type of zoning regulation would impact the solar development plan. So let's see here. I think I've explained everything to my best abilities, but I'll be happy to answer any question you may have. And this is a proposal that we would like some feedback on from the board to move forward. We have set some dates in October to roll this out. We plan to invite some stakeholders and some community members to partake in this event to see if it is a valuable exercise as a community to move forward regarding this topic.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to piggyback on Rabita's presentation. What we would like to do is, we thought that this might be one way we could engage the high school and Purdue students who were really interested in alternative energy and came to our meeting a couple months ago and said they would like to be involved. So that is one of the groups we would like to invite. We would like to invite Plan Commission members, city staffs, county staffs, because they would all be involved at some point in the whatever regulations and permissions we come up with for the zoning ordinance. And the idea is, one, to help everybody get on the same page with the terminology, because it's terminology that is not necessarily in our day-to-day lexicon. So we would all end up with a common language and terminology. And second of all, I think it would help people understand about, as Rabita said, these community trade-offs. What's important in the community, and how do you balance one thing that's important, like potentially having prime industrial sites versus do we take those up with solar farms? Do we take up prime ag land with solar farms? How do we balance the land uses? So that's our goal in doing this. Staff did a trial run with this, and I think that's what made everybody believe this was probably worthwhile doing. So we have 2 potential dates.
That's correct.
The 29th of October or the 30th. The 29th, we could do it in this room, but there is a meeting here until 5 o'clock. One of the things that is beneficial about this room is if we have, depending on how many people we have, we can set up groups of these games and pin the game board to the the push pin walls.
To clarify, you're going to have several of these games going?
Yeah, assuming we have a big enough group, which I suspect we will, so we could have one.
And then the idea after that is finished, staff would take that and break down that information? Is that kind of?
Yeah, I
what
think
we're-
maybe each group would report what they felt was a good balance, both of how much we could generate, where it would be, what kinds of priorities would be involved, and report back to the full group. So we could do it here on the 29th, but we probably couldn't start until 5:30 because of the meeting that's in here until 5. Or we could do it on the 30th, and we could do it at the Tippecanoe County Library in their public meeting rooms. But I don't know if they have walls where we can use push pins. So we'd have to have some kind of foam core base for these game boards, but we could do that. So, so first of all, do you think this is a worthwhile activity to pursue? And second, if you do, then do you have a preference as to the 29th or the 30th?
Sally, let me step back and clarify one thing real quick. First, I think we need to decide if after Zach's comment, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach's comment, if we feel that there's a need to proceed with an ordinance for.
You're right, that is the first step.
So, and I, for one, would say yes. I think we can take a vote or raise a hands if we feel that we should move forward with looking into an ordinance pertaining to solar energy. And so I would say yes.
You asking for a vote?
I'm asking for.
Some of, yeah.
Yes.
I think that this is a good idea, and I think that we do need to pursue, zoning and ordinance classification of this.
Yes.
So I think you have a first and a second by Larry.
First and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so now that that is done, now moving on to the topic as to the game board and the date. I think the game board's a great idea. I think it engages the community. I love your idea on bringing in the concerned citizens that wanted to be a part of this.
Right.
Great idea. So, and in regards to the date, is there anyone that has?
Well, and that is a good question. Do you want your ordinance committee members there for this? Or are you planning on just kind of synthesizing how it goes and then reporting back to them?
Well, I thought it would be beneficial to the ordinance committee members. I mean, we'd probably even invite the full plan commission. We'd advertise it as a meeting. Wouldn't be a public hearing, but we'd advertise it as a meeting so that everybody learns the terminology and sort of what's at stake. So, yeah, I would very much like you and any other plan commission members who are interested to be involved.
So from what I was hearing earlier, is the 29th preferred because we can use our comfortable space?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it makes it a little easier
I would
for
agree.
us.
For everybody, we would prefer that. This is
So the idea of going around and getting everybody's, I think we should just go ahead and plan for the 29th.
Okay.
And those that can make it will.
Okay.
And those that cannot won't.
Good. And we'll get our,
What time?
well, then it would be 5:30. I would say 5:30 to 7:30, just in case. We don't think doing the activity will take 2 hours, but by the time groups report back, we could have 2 hours into it.
Okay. Where will this be posted?
Well, we will, yeah, we have contact information from that ordinance committee for all the students who were here. Plus, I think we have a leader for the high school students and we have a leader for the Purdue students who can rally their groups who are interested. We'll probably email the city staffs and invite them, and I'm not interested in shutting anybody out, so, you know, if we get some press out of this and people show up, that's more the merrier.
The 30th would have been a caucus, would have been caucus for the council.
For the council, okay.
So the
Okay.
29th, 5:30 here, you'll reserve the room.
Yes.
And send out an invite to the entire area plan staff with a little description as to what our plan or intent is, and also to those that were involved and concerned with the other. Okay, great. Any
And
questions?
we're going to provide snacks.
Oh, yes, so that's the highlight.
Yes.
Snacks.
Yes.
So like
Well,
raisins, because they're sun-dried, and
There you go.
Carl's in charge of
sun-dried tomatoes.
There you go.
Okay, okay.
All right, great.
Thank you for all of your work and effort on that.
Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
We do need an RSVP when we send out.
Oh, yes.
One game has 12, or 12.
Okay?
Yeah, there are 12 discrete
Characters.
characters for each game, so we will ask for RSVPs.
Fair enough.
So we know how many games.
Right.
Could you come and not play the game and still observe?
Sure,
that?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Boom, boom, boom. And now on to the West Lafayette Downtown Plan and an update on the comments received from our prior meeting. Mr. O'Gara.
All right. Well, this is the August plan, the latest version that's up there. Well, that's what the public's been looking at already. Just as a reference, we received less than half a dozen comments over the course of the month of September, including 2 from last month's Ordinance Committee meeting. And so at the end of evening of the 26th of September, steering committee met, possibly for the last time, to review those comments. I do have them in a Word document. I can show you, although the ordinance committee comments are in your minutes, so that's already in your packet. You can see those. So I can just briefly tell you, some were accepted, accommodated, others were not. And the ones where there were changes it has to deal. The first was with, and again, if there's interest, I can go through the document itself. That I consolidated the email documents or the email comments plus the ordinance committee comments. But where there are changes is, if you recall, the Tommy Johnston Park area, we had a comment from Mr. Don Teeter, who I believe is present. And he both spoke at the Ordinance Committee and submitted an email prior to that, so it's sort of a duplicate comment. But concerning the Tommy Johnston block, let me go ahead and just bring that up for reference. Okay. So it's block 27 down here at Wood Street and Pierce. He was interested in having property that I believe he either has ownership of or will soon have ownership of, have it not designated for this park space. The steering committee looked at that comment and certainly understood where he was coming from, but also had to keep in mind sort of the long-term vision of this plan, and that if we don't designate spaces for parks, we're relying on sheer gifts by property owners, unless the city goes out and acquires land for it. What this plan is designed to do is to try to provide a sort of a wish list of land we'd like to acquire. Whether or not it is acquired for this park purpose, it would come later in a later negotiation. So in that spirit, we wanted to leave the city an opportunity to purchase this property perhaps one day. But if not, we included in the block by block description for block 27 a second paragraph that outlines a possible development scenario in the event the city is not interested in acquiring all of Block 27. And the scenario is that a portion of that block, we leave it open-ended because, again, we're not sure of the exact acreage, and I don't think we'd like at this level to pigeonhole, that area to just that amount of acreage. That roughly the western portion of that block could develop under the downtown village mid-rise category, the red, as a planned development. And as part of that planned development, a portion of that developed area would contribute to a partial expansion of Tommy Johnston Park, and that the design of that development space would be cohesive with this park, that this project would be designed with this park in mind since it would be on its doorstep. And planned development is probably the best way to do that because we're really looking at the minutia of a site when we do PDs. And when we have a potential public park expansion coming up against a development site, we want to make sure there's some harmony between the two areas, that they interface with each other. So we presented sort of two options for Block 27, a development scenario and then a whole park scenario. And that way it gives the city some opportunities to consider in the future. So that was the change there. Let's see. From the Ordinance Committee comments, of course, one of the comments was from Mr. Don Teeter, so I just talked about that. The other was from Mr. Bale, who I believe is also in the audience. And we went through the comments to sort of pick out the ones that had direct impact into the plan. One was a comment considering expanding this notion that we apply to the historic properties. The comment was expanding this idea to all existing buildings, or perhaps an unspecified number of buildings within the study area, that all new buildings would have to have this policy of deference, as I call it, as with the historic structures. We discussed this at length and felt it didn't have any real applicability, that it would really restrict development potential, that it would assume that every non-historic building in the village and the levee has value. And we, as a steering committee, they disagreed with that. And so they felt that there should be opportunities for development, but we have specifically highlighted certain historic buildings that have been cataloged already that we do want to have protected in some way by this policy. Another comment he had was on the grid system, about it perhaps being too tight and so forth. And the plan stresses repeatedly in Chapter 5, where we talk about the street grid, that this is a conceptual layout. This is by no means a pre-engineered environment, and that the final alignments, whether or not they're even solidified, are subject to change. And so it may look tight, but this is sort of the kind of the first run of it. If we were to actually go in either through a plan development process, or the city was interested in acquiring, say, via TIF money, right away for this, then that's when really the rubber hits the road, and these final alignments would be thoroughly studied to ensure that there is adequate spacing of intersections, et cetera. So just wanted to stress that issue there. So we feel like we've more than addressed this issue, that this grid is not set in stone, that it is a concept only. In terms of affordable housing, that issue is brought up in the implementation strategies. How that is going to be achieved, we essentially leave up to further study, that it's essentially a goal that we want to accommodate affordable housing, and what form it takes and by what means we achieve it, and what we consider affordable housing anyway, since it is somewhat of a nebulous term. It is something that we would leave towards further study, but we wanted to highlight its importance as the community matures and develops, that multiple income levels could be represented within this downtown area, and it doesn't become a fully gentrified place, so to speak. So we feel like we have included that in there as a statement for further study by others, perhaps, and that if this is something that is critical to the city council, that they could initiate that and say, all right, it's time to add another layer, another lens to this issue, and let's really study it and actually try to create definitions and ways forward and what our goals are and where we'd like to apply those. Mr. Bale also had a comment about the Chauncey Hill Mall development. In Chapter 5, we actually include their site plan. There it is. And in the verbiage there, we describe that the elements that this very conceptual plan that was publicly presented by the Trinitas Group and their consultants, the elements of this plan we endorse. Now, how it finally gets developed one day remains to be seen. But this idea of having an open space common over which these buildings would then overlook into this space, we like that concept, and we stress that we want to make sure that whatever's developed relates with the new and historic development that surrounds it, but that this is really the center of the action, so to speak, and so it's very appropriate to have some sort of town common, town gathering space, which they offered this initially, and so this plan, by including this site plan image, we would be endorsing this kind of general broad concept of these elements. So we have that in there as well. And plus the land use plan itself recommends all the downtown core areas be developed through the plan development process. Because these are the very high profile sites, we want to make sure that they are developed appropriately, and we'll be heavily scrutinizing all aspects of the development, hence the need for a PD. Finally, he had an issue about aesthetics, and this is kind of connected with final look of a building, and this really falls under multiple potential tools that the implementation strategies already kind of have raised. And one is an architectural review board as one possibility. The other is a very robust form-based overlay over this area that heavily scrutinizes architectural detail. And these are two tools that could work in concert, but could be overkill. I mean, one or the other really could accomplish these things in terms of what the final look of a building is, the architectural elements on it. And so we feel like we have implementation strategies in the plan right now that would speak to this, and then when we get to the zoning stage next year, we will be looking at that heavily, and because we certainly, especially in these core areas, want to have a unified theme, and as well as a fairly high bar for architecture. So I believe those were all of the substantive comments there. So I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Ryan, can you remind me, so in the Chauncey Hill area,
Yeah.
Mall area, what is the maximum height that would be, recognizing that this would be PD, but what are your thoughts about the maximum height that would be for?
Well, the downtown core designation is essentially a kind of a 10-story with potential for higher up to the FAA ceiling in certain locations. And in the block-by-block description, we make it clear that we want to make sure that there's architectural transitions to the lower intensity areas to the south. And so we're pretty much trying to isolate the tallest, highest profile parts of the structures kind of in the central part of the site, or sort of in the back, where there's already an alley and so forth. And so that's kind of where we stand on the height. So the block descriptions, it's not just a straight ceiling, you can go right up the FAA ceiling. We get more into the details about how we want it to look, so that there's, again, our main goal is to make sure there's appropriate transitions, and you don't have a super tall building coming up next to something that's, half that size. If we can prevent that, so, employing upper story step backs is a way to, take a large structure and to sort of diminish it as it's, transitioning to another part of town. Plus, this site is going to bump up against the historic structures policy. The Vaughn's buildings are all historically significant, and so that that northwestern corner there would be a critical piece to make sure that we have some transitions to those 3-story buildings that are there. So those all have to go in the hopper when this site comes in for development, whether it's developed as a whole or whether it's chopped up and sold off. We'll be looking at it as a whole, regardless of how it develops, so that it does develop appropriately and those transitions exist.
Ryan, when will those changes be available? Are they on the web? They aren't on the web now.
No, they're not on the web right now. I'm also, APC staff internally has already submitted comments to me. There's a lot of it's kind of cross the T, dot the I type comments, but we are making a few adjustments to the discussion on floodplains. Let's see. This page in particular, our floodplain manager, Larry, has wanted to add some verbiage concerning the 500-year flood, which is the 0.02% area. It will be updating this map to show that area as well. And it may look a little dramatic, that's why we wanted to have some descriptions about what you're seeing, because it essentially engulfs most of the levee, the 500-year flood. And he's recommending a policy that development on the levee prepare for the 500-year flood, in terms of making sure that ground floor residential units probably aren't a good idea. We're probably looking at development that you're going to have buildings that are over their parking lots potentially, and so he sort of raises these issues because FEMA is not holding flood insurance to the 500-year floodplain, but according to him, they're talking about it at the conference he just went to. And so it may be something we have to deal with in the future. And so we felt, since this is the future land use plan, this is a great place to broach that and have this policy of relating to the 500-year flood. So as soon as we make these changes, I'm literally making them now, we hope to get it up on the website. Because of advertising, this is a comprehensive plan amendment. We'd be going to the November APC meeting, and that's essentially what I'm asking you all to make a motion on. If you choose, and so we would have I'd probably have it updated by next week, probably.
Okay. Would you let us know when that is, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So the plan is to update, get it up on the website, and then to actually hear the actual ordinance at the November ordinance meeting?
Correct.
Thank you.
November
plan.
Full APC.
Ryan is asking you guys tonight to take action on this if you're going to recommend it to the full APC where they'll hear the amendment, correct?
Right. Yeah, at this point, in September, we talked that we'll get back to you when we get the public comment, giving it to you. And so we've made some changes from those comments, and so there's really no reason to hold it up any further unless you see a need to, or there's other discussion raised from the public that you would see fit to delay it. We want to make sure you're satisfied with what you're sending. So.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back, as we've done the last ones, is typically we've had a final version and it's available, and then the public can come in and comment on that, and then any negotiations can handle then, but Are we trying to be under a deadline that we want to be there before the end of the year, or is there a rush to do that? Because it's, I mean, we don't see those comments that you've made those changes, and I don't know if the public's had an opportunity to see those and comment on them.
Well, I can show you what the comments that were consolidated from the emails. Like I said, the whole point was to have the public comment period and then close it and then do sort of a final update incorporating those comments. I kind of explained what we changed as a result of those comments, including some staff changes. So
if you get all those in final form, is it possible to see that at the November Ordinance Committee meeting and kind of put it out there and see if we have any further comments?
We could. I think for advertising purposes, that would kick everything another month. We'd have to go to December APC, January council.
Yeah, unless we advertise for November ABC and went to November ordinance committee.
That's true. We could do that.
Once it's advertised.
I mean, we have another ordinance committee meeting coming up, so we could go ahead and advertise for the November APC, assuming that we'll be going there.
Hopefully we get there. If we don't, we just
If we don't, then we'll continue
if
it.
there's some issue. Okay.
So, we could come back and I'll basically ask you if there's any questions. You'll be able to have seen the final version at that point, if there's any lingering comments.
I want to confirm, we're not under a deadline of sorts that there's a reason that we need to push this through immediately.
No, mayor and council have not required us to wrap this by December. We initiated it in December, so kind of cool. It would take a year, but
So is the timeline clear? I think
Takes
we've
as long
sort
as
of
it
got
needs
a
to.
Plan B timeline. Could we re-summarize the Plan B or the timeline that you all were talking about, that Kathy and
For
so forth
clarity.
suggested? Yes, just for clarity. Thank you.
So we have to have legal ads to the newspapers pretty early. So we would send legal ads to the newspaper for this plan to be heard for adoption by the full Area Plan Commission at its November meeting. We would also bring to you the final version at the November Ordinance Committee meeting 2 weeks before APC's meeting. If either at Ordinance Committee, if at Ordinance Committee, there are, I suppose, last minute comments that you want added to the plan, or after having had a look at it in its final form, there's questions or comments you still have, we can do those at November 2nd. And then what we would do is ask the Plan Commission to continue it from its November meeting to its December meeting.
I move that timeline.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. Good with that? With that, at this point, are done, Ryan?
Yeah, unless you want to see the comments in their consolidated form.
I want to see if we have any public comment first, because we've got 30 minutes or so left. Is anyone wishing to?
I went to that meeting at the West Lafayette Public Library.
Ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi.
You want to do it or me?
Can you just please state your name and your address
Sure,
for us?
sure.
And we try to keep our comments to 5
Absolutely.
minutes, so
Oh, no
thank
worries
you.
about that. Okay. I don't know that much. My name is Liz O'Neill. I live at 206 DeHart Street in West Lafayette. Okay? Okay, here's my question. I went to this meeting that you were at in, I think it was the end of August, right, at the West Lafayette Public Library, and there were lots of comments by lots of people and concerning traffic flow and how are the pedestrians going to go across River Road, and bicycles, and just the kind of increased population in a smaller space. And I don't see those comments here, and I think they were real legit, and I don't see them addressed. So I don't know, all those people have emailed you guys or called you guys, or I don't know what is the process. There was probably 5 or 6 people with legit comments.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Ms. O'Neill, for your comments. Ryan, do you mind responding?
Yeah. We had two staff members in the room that night that were essentially not really taking minutes, but they were essentially trying, as each comment was coming out, they would kind of categorize them. What is the comment? What is it under? Is it traffic flow? Whatever. And so we made a list of what those questions were, the questions people had. There were a heck of a lot of clarification type questions that didn't necessarily impact the plan itself. We also had a lot of conflicting comments. We had people that said, we want to have fast roads going through the levee to move cars as fast as possible. Right after that, somebody came in and said, we need to pedestrianize the whole levee. So, in those sorts of instances, we have to make judgment calls about, what's the most prudent course of action to go, because you have comments that, cannot be reconciled. So we do have that list as well that these staff members had made. We can share that with you as well about what people had talked about. There were more than a few people, even during the meeting, where I had asked them specifically and gave them my card and asked them, hey, could you please contact us? And I'd like to get down your idea in writing so that we actually have it and we can discuss it. I made that offer to at least 2 or 3 individuals and did not hear back from them. So I made the offer, but
I have a question for clarity.
and I did not have anyone come to the office during office hours asking.
So on this in regards to walking bridges or walking paths, et cetera, are we at the stage to where we can even begin to put those into our plan, if you will? Or is that a work in progress, work in process?
We have, perhaps referring to, go back in the transportation section.
And Ryan, it might be helpful for everyone in the audience too, because they're going to have to go look this up. You could call out the sections so they can kind of refresh their memory on where that's located.
Sure, yeah. This is Chapter 5, the transportation section. They promote 2 pedestrian bridges. Is that's in the rec plan? Is that what you're talking about? Or? Well,
so the pedestrian, but to lay out in the downtown plan where people are going to be crossing roads, I mean, I don't think it's possible at this point in time, is it?
No. How?
And the speed limits of the roads that are going through.
Right.
I mean,
No,
all of that comes later.
That would come much later.
That's okay.
When we actually trigger a road project for either to acquire right-of-way to have a road built, and then as that road is then engineered, that's when those sorts of issues come to mind.
So as valid as and concerning as these comments are, this isn't necessarily the stage to take those into consideration.
Right.
Okay.
There's a lot of those concerns that would come at a later stage.
Okay.
Correct.
Ryan, am I correct? You used the word concept, and I think that's important to understand that this plan is, if you want to use it, kind of a starting point of a dream.
Correct.
That it's very conceptual, and as Jackson points out, it's one that we're not looking at details. We're not looking at all this. When all of this, if and when it comes to reality, may look very different than what's in this plan, but it's at least a starting point.
That's correct, yes. That's what these comprehensive plan amendments are for these neighborhood plans. They're an opportunity to sort of dream big, think way outside the box, sometimes put multiple strategies that may not necessarily work together in order to really get the brain juices flowing, so to speak. And so there's really, it's an opportunity to put many ideas out. Some may or may not get implemented. But if, and again, it is policy, not ordinance. So there's no force of law behind this document. This is just a policy statement that could be easily ignored by a council or commission. But in terms of land use strategies, staff will certainly defend them if council adopts this plan. And that'll affect, plan development negotiations. But again, at the end of the day, we just provide a recommendation as staff. power for zoning, of course, lies in council's hands. So yeah, this is a conceptual plan in all of its aspects and all of its recommendations. And every single thing in here is subject to further study and analysis. So that's important to stress.
Thank you very much for that.
Hold on, I got another follow-up for you, Ryan, and maybe you kind of touched on it if I might. Which parts of this plan would be considered kind of set in stone and which would be kind of a dream or conceptual, like the bridges, obviously, but is it just down when you get to the land use and the zoning, that's pretty much that would be set? And if so, how hard is it for us to revisit that in 5 years or 3 years as things
Right.
develop and maybe a vision to go a different direction is?
Well, as a policy document, the legislative bodies aren't beholden to vote a certain way because the plan says so. They can ignore the plan in a rezone action, for instance. In a plan development negotiation, staff could be very cavalier and enter into a negotiation that completely, clashes with this. And city council would rightly put us on the spotlight, say, why are you ignoring the plan? This is what it says, So, so there's nothing in here that binds any legislative body or even the Plan Commission to follow anything in this. It is a statement of policy, and so that said, we have no business adopting it as a body, if you're not behind it. And so, but if there is in the distant future, say it is adopted in some form, amendments can be made because community priorities have changed, and that happens from time to time. There is nothing set in stone concerning comprehensive planning at this level. So, am I right in saying that, Sally?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment or two. What the statute says when it comes to zoning decisions and underlying adopted plans is that the Plan Commission and legislators should, take into account the plan, but there does not have to be one-to-one consistency between zoning and the plan. I do want to talk a little bit about the street grid system because that's probably the most revolutionary part of this plan. As Ryan says, right now in this plan, it is conceptual. It's a goal. If this plan is adopted, the goal of creating a grid just that would almost mirror downtown Lafayette in its street layout would be policy. However, the next step will be to translate from this plan into the new thoroughfare plan, which is also being developed at this stage. At the thoroughfare plan stage, things will probably be refined a little bit more. The thoroughfare plan goes through the same adoption process as this neighborhood plan because it is also an element of the comprehensive plan. Just like this is land use, that's thoroughfare. Where the rubber hits the road is when the thoroughfare plan street design gets adopted as a part of the subdivision ordinance. Because right now we have a chart in the thoroughfare plan that says if your road is classified as a non-residential collector and you're a developer, well, if the thoroughfare plan says that, that chart has been duplicated in the subdivision ordinance. So once in the subdivision ordinance, if you have if you are developing on a street that is a non-residential collector, that chart says, as a developer, it is your obligation by law to build this street this way. So when we get from this to a thoroughfare plan, and the thoroughfare plan road design gets translated and adopted into the subdivision ordinance, then it does become law. And anybody who develops down here will have some obligations to build roads just like they do any place else. You know, and if you build a subdivision, you're obligated to build the roads to serve it. And probably more and more, we will be requiring that they either contribute money to or build the abutting roads, because more and more is falling to local government, and we think that there's probably more of a share that probably should come from the development community for the perimeter roads, not just the internal roads. So we have 2 more steps with this plan where we would refine it before it would actually, road construction design standards would actually become requirements of development.
Time frame of a thoroughfare plan? I mean, is that
Well,
a year? Is that a?
Yeah, Tim's making pretty good progress. I think by next summer, we'll probably
Really? Okay.
be presenting probably earlier in concept form or early draft form. We're at the stage now where we are heavily engaging the County Highway Department and the 2 city engineers and the development departments. And then after that, then it'll probably move pretty quickly then to the subdivision ordinance phase, because we don't want a thoroughfare plan that's out of whack with the subdivision ordinance or vice versa.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Public comment? Oh, we got.
Evening, everyone. Zachary Bale, 124 Connolly Street. So a lot just unfolded there, too. So I don't know if everyone would view this necessarily as a pleasant dream. I know there's some that would view it as an unpleasant dream, and others, especially those perhaps they were in attendance at the August 29th meeting, would say the start of a nightmare. So a little concerning to hear that. And so I'll just talk about a few points here. One, very curious to know what outside of the box thinking is implemented in the plan. Just kind of taking those out. I think there's some, such as the pedestrian bridge that was mentioned earlier, is one such item. And I think most of us know, at least it was discussed at that meeting, the next plan would be to create a zoning overlay, so that would have the binding nature, whereas the proposal would not. And then we did hear mention that this would be a statement of policy, but also that statement becomes a reference. As we know, everyone will start referencing the plan because that is what the plan says. And so I think the members of the public, when we hear that, it becomes concerning that some of those ideas and things aren't even mentioned. Unlike the New Chauncey plan, even though we had a big dream of having that large urban parkway along the west side of the neighborhood, it was still included in the plan. And so even though it was this larger, one could argue, pipe dream of sorts, or in this case, park dream, it was still included in the plan, so it still can be referenced. And so I think having that referenceability is very important. And then also, good to see a few more people here tonight. However, to call what we had in September a public input month-long session, I think is a gross overstatement. If we only had half a dozen or so people actually write comments, and one of myself summarizing some of those at the last meeting, I don't think we're doing it right in terms of getting the public engaged or excited, engaged, and educated on these issues. We heard that some cards were handed out, information regarding engagement, and one always knows you want to ask for that information if you genuinely want that person to be engaged in the process, because the likelihood anyone who's ever worked in relations or sales or anything knows you get the other person's info. That way you can follow up if you actually want to have that connection. And so it looks like we'll do that for the solar panel board game, but I'm not sure what kind of effort or courtesy was done to the 50 or so members that were at that August 29th meeting regarding the downtown plan. And so, as we heard from Liz's comments, it doesn't sound like everything necessarily was captured there. We understand they were short of staff. But I think one should just question, perhaps, maybe we haven't gotten the public input that this type of plan would warrant. And then also, from the steering committee perspective, I find it very concerning, since these meetings are closed and not open to the public, there's no recording of these meetings, there's no minutes from these meetings, it's impossible for the public to understand the discourse, if any rigorous dialogue occurred regarding those comments. What was the rebuttal? What was the further exemption? So I think one point to possibly change in the future, instead of having a disconnect of relaying comments from the public, why can't the public, I think it was mentioned here by yourself, Mr. Bogan, the public actually engage the steering committee? That way the public can represent their idea. For instance, mine wasn't necessarily about deeming everything a historic building. Looking back through the minutes, it is articulated in there better, where the concern would be in these downtown cores, if the first developer goes in there and builds a 10-story building, would other developers that want to build a smaller building, such as a 3-story, which is still allowed under this idea of the downtown core, are they going to be pressured and say, actually, we don't want you in this particular core because we already have a 10-story building? So that was the idea. And so is the plan, perhaps, for some of the development strategy, get large buildings in first, that way all the buildings have to be large? Or are we going to allow something like this policy of deference where, even though you may not be able to build another 8-story building, 10-story building, would a 3-story building be allowed? And vice versa. If there's a smaller block being developed, are all the buildings going to have to be smaller in nature? Or are you going to have a 3-story next to a 10-story, next to a 5-story, next to a 3, next to a 10, or if there's an FAA one that gets above the maximum? And so that was more of what the comment was actually trying to say, not treat everyone like that, but what are we going to do when those scenarios do come up in the process, and the plan doesn't talk about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bale.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Teeter from Lafayette, and appreciate you letting me speak to you again. The topic at hand is Block 27, which is part of the proposed park. And I don't want to rehash what I've already said. It's in regards to labeling a park destroys value, and maybe a eminent domain would be better. But I just want to say that I've been doing this for a long time, 20 years, and I've always been told, everybody, all the powers that be, tell you that don't build in the neighborhoods, or don't attempt to build in the neighborhoods to the north. In other words, if you're going to build apartments, build south of State Street. Buy land south of State Street and build apartments. And so, I'm trying to play within the rules. And I bought land south of State Street. And now I'm being told, hey, you can't build there either. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I'm trying to play within the rules and build south of State Street. If I can't build there, where can I build? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Teeter. Do we have any comments?
I would just say that I wouldn't disagree with Mr. Bale about a project this large having not a lot of public input. I mean, maybe we have appropriate, and sometimes by the end, somebody's just heard about it, and we're gonna hear some input. And I think maybe having another meeting in November, just kind of here's the final plan, one last shot to make your case to change that, or if there's something maybe they haven't even seen the changes, that one last shot to get your 2 cents in there and see if we can work something out. And if this is all we get on public input, it's. I think it's good, but I think it's good to hear it one more time in November when we have a final product.
Which is what we voted on earlier,
Yes,
correct?
yes, we're
I want to
gonna do that.
confirm.
Yep.
So we
And we
still
certainly always, I think that what we know is that at any point along there, we have the opportunity to say, we're not going to hear this, we're not going to send this on. We're not going to send this on yet to the November full meeting, because it just needs a little more time.
correct.
Right, yeah, thank you.
I agree. So with that, we will have, where are my dates here? we will have a November ordinance meeting. What is the date of the November ordinance meeting?
Should be the first Wednesday, the 6th.
Which will reveal the plan, the entire plan with changes, et cetera. The idea being to hear the plan and potentially move it on, but maybe not. Maybe continue it. And so we would welcome all public input at the November ordinance meeting. And so if, and this comment, Mr. Bale, because we hear you about public input, if you have others that would like to bring public input, please, we would welcome that. Thank you very much.
Just for clarification for me, in the past, it seemed like the ordinance committee was the final reconciliation by all these people, and we could make changes to their plan. And when you advertise this for the November meeting, are you publishing the entire plan?
No, it's not required by statute.
Okay, so even though you'd advertise it and we made a change, it could still be heard. Why would it need to be continued to December?
Well, I think
And that's just a procedural question. It really doesn't make any difference. I'm just curious.
the full planning commission can amend, well, we have a filing deadline, 30 days prior to the November APC meeting. The document that exists in draft form 30 days ahead is what is filed for hearing. So if there is a change to that, I think it probably has to be by the full plan commission at the meeting. Now, the ordinance committee could recommend to the plan commission, we think you ought to change the document in this way. But that amendment to the amendment would have to, I think, occur by the full plan commission.
Yes, and I agree, and it's a timing issue. So remember, this committee is charged with the idea of kind of vetting new proposals, making sure they make sense, and then making a recommendation. You guys aren't making the final decision, you're making a recommendation, and when you say no, basically the APC's charged you with vetting things, say they're not ready, we don't want to send it on. However, when you do send it on, it's still got to meet our packet deadline, so everybody gets a chance to look at it, prepare, it goes out to the media and everybody else. Now, the APC always, and we've done that before, has the ability to say, you know, we understand your recommendation, however, we want to make an amendment or we're going to change and do that on the floor. But there's also been circumstances, I think recently, where the APC said, well, we want to kick it back to committee because we've charged you guys with looking at it and making sure. So there's different ways you can handle that, but just from a pure timing perspective, if there are going to be big substantial changes to the plan, it probably means it's getting then pushed out to the December meeting just because they're going to have time to make the changes to the packet. In the alternative, you could send it forward with a recommendation saying we're recommending this only if certain amendments are made, but that gets a little messy because then everyone's sort of done their research on the packet as it went out. So we probably cross that bridge when we come to it, but you do have a few options on how you want to handle that.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I mean, in the past, we have tweaked those documents, many documents at this meeting, and I wouldn't want to pass up that opportunity as we hear new information, opposed to advertising it and say, you can't change it. So, okay, I'm on with you.
I get the feeling that we are trying to push something too fast. I understand the procedural. My question, and it goes back to Gary's and my original question of, are we trying to hit a specific deadline, a deadline that means anything? So I would like to recommend that we actually, so I'm going to make another motion, which will, do we have to negate Gary's motion?
No,
Or
just
why don't
depends
you
on
make
what
the
you
motion?
want. I will make a motion that we do not advertise the plan for the November meeting, and it'll be heard in November, and if everything is fine, then at that time, we will make a motion to hear it in December. So I would move that we not advertise this proposal for the November meeting.
November APC meeting.
APC meeting, yes.
But do hear the ordinance committee.
We'll still hear it at the ordinance committee, and we'll see where it goes. It may take another ordinance committee meeting. If we have a large public input and we're dealing with some complex issue, we'll hear it another time. And just kind of do it like we have in the past. So that's my motion.
There's a first.
We have a motion
Second?
Second
We
from
have a
Jerry.
second.
Second, yeah.
All in favor of Gary's motion? Aye. All opposed? So that motion carries. Okay. Thank you, Gary. With that, we are on to adjournment.
Move to adjourn?
Thank you for your comments.
Do you guys do tacos?
For council?
No, thank you.